You notice them across the camp. Your eyes meet for a moment longer than they should. Your chest does something strange. Your brain floods with a feeling so old it has no name in any modern language, and yet you know it immediately. That feeling is not new. It is not a product of romance novels or dating apps or candlelit dinners. It is somewhere between 300,000 and 3 million years old. Depending on how far back you want to go. And the story of how your ancestors actually found partners, formed bonds, and navigated love is far stranger, far messier, and far more human than anything you have ever seen on a dating profile. So what did it actually look like? First, forget almost everything you think you know. The image of a caveman dragging a woman by the hair, a cartoon. An insult, a lie. The idea of ancient humans as brutish, loveless creatures pairing off for pure survival, also wrong. And the notion that monogamy is ancient and natural, or alternatively that prehistoric humans lived in some kind of free love commune, both of those are wrong too. In the ways that matter most. The truth is more complicated. And more interesting. Let's start with the group. Because you cannot understand prehistoric relationships without understanding the band. Your ancestors did not live in isolated couples. They lived in small, mobile forager bands of roughly 20 to 50 individuals. These were your people. You were born into this group. Raised by it, fed by it, and protected by it. Everyone knew everyone. There were no strangers within the camp. And outside the camp, there was wilderness and rival bands and predators. This changes everything about how attraction worked. Anthropologist Helen Fisher, who has spent decades studying the neuroscience and evolution of love at Rutgers University, identified 3 distinct brain systems that drive human mating: lust, attraction, and attachment. These systems are ancient. They run on dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin, chemicals your brain produces automatically, without asking your permission. When you see someone attractive, your dopamine spikes. When you form a bond over time, oxytocin cements it. These processes were running in your ancestors exactly as they run in you. The feelings were real. The longing was real. The heartbreak was real. But the social architecture around those feelings looked nothing like today. In a band of 50 people, you probably grew up around most of the people your own age. Childhood familiarity tends to suppress sexual attraction, a phenomenon documented by anthropologist Edvard Westermark in the late 1800s and confirmed repeatedly since. Known as the Westermark effect. It acts as a built-in incest avoidance system. Children raised together before age 6 rarely develop attraction to each other, even when they are not biologically related. Your ancestors' brains were already solving the problem of inbreeding before anyone understood genetics. So who did you find attractive? Almost always, someone from outside your immediate band. This is where it gets interesting. Hunter-gatherer bands were not isolated. They met other bands at seasonal aggregation sites, rivers swollen with fish, valleys where game converged, sacred locations marked by ochre and old bones. These gatherings were social events, trading events, and mating events all at once. Archaeologist Polly Wiesner, who spent 40 years studying the Jew, Honski San people of southern Africa, one of the best documented living forager societies, found that these interband meetings were critical for maintaining what she called the HXARO exchange network, a web of reciprocal gift-giving relationships that stretched across dozens of bands and hundreds of kilometers. And within that same network, partners were found, alliances were formed, and new genetic material flowed between groups. You met someone, maybe at one of these gatherings, maybe when a neighboring band passed through your territory to trade. The attraction was immediate and physical, as it always is. First, height, health, smell, the quality of someone's skin, the brightness of their eyes, the confidence in how they moved. These are not shallow observations. They are ancient biological signals, evolved over millions of years to detect genetic fitness, immune system diversity, and reproductive health. Your ancestors read them automatically, without any of the guilt modern culture sometimes attaches to noticing them. But attraction in a forager band was also deeply social. How did this person treat others? Were they generous? How did they behave when resources were scarce? Did they contribute, or did they take? Richard Lee, the Canadian anthropologist whose landmark fieldwork with the Dobie-Jew, Honski-san in the 1960s transformed our understanding of hunter-gatherer life, found that sharing, of food, of labor, of care, was the moral center of these societies. Stinginess was one of the worst social crimes imaginable. A person who hoarded, who failed to give, who looked out only for themselves, became dangerous to the whole group. And that danger was legible to anyone watching. So when you were evaluating a potential partner, you were watching for all of it at once. The physical and the social were inseparable. Now, what happened next? Here's where the data becomes genuinely surprising. Humans are what biologists call a mildly polygynous species with a strong pair bonding tendency. That sentence sounds like academic noise. So let us unpack it. Mildly polygynous means that in our evolutionary past, some males did have access to multiple females, though not nearly to the degree seen in gorillas or other highly polygynous primates. Strong pair bonding tendency means that despite this, most humans form relatively stable, emotionally deep, long-term partnerships, and those partnerships are associated with better outcomes for offspring. The anthropological record suggests that across most forager societies studied, some form of pair bonding was common, though the nature, duration, and exclusivity of those bonds varied enormously. In some bands, partnerships were long and stable, more or less monogamous in practice. In others, sequential monogamy was the norm. You formed a deep bond. It lasted years. It ended, and you formed another. In a small number of documented societies, arrangements more complex than simple pairs were practiced and sanctioned. The Eight People of Paraguay, extensively studied by anthropologist Kim Hill, recognized multiple categories of fatherhood: a primary social father, a secondary father, and so on, reflecting a social reality in which children might have bonds with more than one man who contributed to their care. The key insight is this: there was no single prehistoric template for relationships. What was universal was the emotional depth of the bond itself. Love, as a felt experience, appears to be human in a way that specific relationship structures are not. Let's reconstruct a specific moment. Imagine it is roughly 40,000 years ago. You are somewhere in what will one day be called Europe. Near a river, at the edge of summer. Two bands have come together. There is food, fish, dried berries, the last of a deer carcass, and there is fire. And there is noise. Someone begins to play a bone flute. We know this because a vulture bone flute found in the Hohlfels cave in southern Germany, dated to at least 40,000 years ago by archaeologist Nicholas Kennard and his team, is among the oldest musical instruments ever found. Music at these gatherings was real. Dancing was real. Laughter was real. And you are there. And across the fire, someone is watching you in that way. Your dopamine does not know it is 40,000 years ago. It does not care. How did courtship actually work? Mostly through sustained presence. You stayed near this person. You found reasons to be helpful. You shared food, a deeply significant act. Not casual at all. You talked. If the two bands shared enough language, or you communicated in the universal language of expression and gesture, over days at the gathering, a bond either formed or it did not. If it did, a decision had to be made. Would one of you leave your band to join the others? Or would you meet again at the next gathering? Or was this something that would end when the camp broke up? These were not small decisions. Your band was your survival network. Leaving it meant leaving the people who would share food with you when you came back empty-handed. The people who would help raise your children. The people who knew your history. And yet people left. They do today. In every documented forager society, love, and the promise of a good partner, has always been worth the risk. Here is the counterintuitive twist. We tend to assume that modern relationships, with their apps, their language, their therapy, their endless options, are more emotionally sophisticated than anything that came before. But James Sussman, the anthropologist who spent 25 years studying the Jew, Honski-san, and wrote Affluence Without Abundance, found something striking about forager relationships that industrial societies have largely lost: radical social transparency. In a band of 50 people, You could not pretend. You could not perform a version of yourself that did not exist. Everyone had seen you afraid. Everyone had seen you generous and selfish. Everyone knew your moods, your habits, your history, your family, your flaws. A relationship formed in that environment was a relationship between two actual people, not two curated projections. Modern loneliness is, in part, the loneliness of that lost transparency. The longing to be known, fully, without curation, is 300,000 years old. Your ancestors did not fall in love in candlelit restaurants or across crowded bars. They fell in love across campfires, over shared meat, in the middle of ordinary life lived in full view of everyone who mattered. The feeling that hit you at the start, that strange, ancient thing your chest does, is the same one. It was never about the setting. It was never about the ritual or the app or the algorithm. It was always about the fire. And the person watching you from across it,